Right, you're listening to the Maker's Quest podcast. I am Brian Benham.
And I am Greg Porter. And today we're actually going to back off a little bit and we're going to talk about what Brian and I have cooking in our shops. I think both of us have been up to quite a bit here lately. Somehow we made it through all of the holidays and the headaches and frustration and stress that those can bring sometimes, especially when you're a maker trying to wrap up things for year end. But Brian, why don't we start off and talk about a couple of the things, or maybe just one of the things you got cooking in your shop, and we can kind of go back and forth.
Yeah, right now I am building a metal steel table base. It's pretty big. It's about 5 foot uh, long. Um, I'd say 16 inches deep and 38 inches tall. So it is pretty big deal. It's one of those times where I wish I had a shop assistant to help me move this thing around because as I'm welding, I constructed it by welding up a little metal frame out of some um, angle iron, and then cladded it with some steel cladding. So yeah, so it's just a lot of workout to move this thing around, and yeah, so definitely one of those things I wish I had a helper to help me with. And I'm trying some new patina processes on it. And one thing that I'm struggling with and having a little bit of a challenge with is I can do my test piece on a little 12-inch square piece of metal, and it's like, all right, that works pretty cool. But then when you go to scale it up on this 5 foot long piece, well, by the time I get from foot one to foot five, foot one has overreacted or has dried or whatever bad thing has happened over there. So foot five looks awesome and foot one looks terrible because it got away from me and I wasn't able to control it as much as I had hoped. So it's back out of the finishing room and back in the shop so I can sand it back to try again with some new techniques on how I'm
There's
going to control it.
nothing better to work on your technique than a total redo.
Yeah, yeah, but I mean, it's just one of those things. The thing is so big, you just have no idea what's gonna happen until how you do it. So I kind of have a game plan in my head, and on my little 12-inch test pieces, I I started the reaction and then kind of let it sit and just sat there and watched it for 5 or 10 minutes to see how fast it was reacting and kind of like dialing back the strength of my mix of my chemicals and things. So a little diluted version to slow it down so that way I can stay on top of it.
So is this going to be like a dining table or some type of an accent table, or what's the purpose of the table itself?
It's just going to be kind of like a hangout table. I've done one for a client before, and this is actually for the same client, just another piece for their house, and it's just like a entertainment thing when they have guests over and parties over. It's high enough that you can just kind of lean on it and hang out with your drink or martini or wine or whatever you want to do with it. So yeah.
Very cool. So you talked about the base of it being steel. Is the top of it going to be steel as well, or are you going to do something different there?
The top is going to be Wingate.
Okay.
The top is already made. I built the top first. The top is on site, so I don't know how I'm gonna photograph that because I decided, well, I'll do a YouTube video of this. So it might just be just the base, and then, depending on the client's schedule, if I can get out there in a reasonable time to photograph and all that, and also, I don't wanna overstay my welcome if I like, "Hey, can I set up a whole bunch of lights to try to get a good picture of this or not?" You know? So
Well, you may have to rely on AI to make that thing complete.
yeah, to put a top on or something, or at least Photoshop the background when I install it and put everything together. I could take a step back and take a picture of it. But
So
um,
is that going to be is it going to live in Colorado, or is it out of state?
yeah, it's here in yeah, it's cross town for me. Yeah,
Okay.
they've this is maybe the fifth piece of furniture I built for them, so they've been long term clients. So I'm hoping they'll just be like, yeah, cool, whatever you want to do.
Oh wow. That's awfully cool to have clients that trust you at that level. So the tables there, well, one thing I would say, working with steel as I have over the years, you weld things on, they just get heavier and heavier and bulkier and bulkier. I feel like my DNA must be part Egyptian, because I've always figured out some weird block and tackle to
Yeah.
roll pieces across the garage. As they get heavier and heavier, you learn to use leverage and other methods to get things to move. But yeah, having another set of hands is always a pretty
Yeah. So
important thing.
the cool thing about this house is it's going in the basement, but this house has a little elevator in it. And
Oh
doing the
wow.
weight calculation, I can put the base in the elevator, close the door, hit, and then go downstairs and call the elevator, and I'm still within the weight calculation if it just rides by itself.
That well, yeah. What's the alternative there? If you built a piece like that was too heavy for the elevator, do you bring in movers to move them down the stairs, or do you do something else to?
The only time that has happened was this big platform bed. And when I originally talked to the client, it was going to go up in their upstairs bedroom, but then they decided to make the downstairs bedroom the guest bedroom. And I was prepared with some little dollies, those furniture moving dollies, just to set it on there and then just roll it down the hall, right? And then I'll just a couple of steps to get it in the house and whatnot. But then when I got there, she's all like, "Yeah, we decided to put it downstairs," and I was like, "I am not prepared for myself to." Me and my daughter came with me to help me lift it, but she was like all of like 15 at the time and little wiry kid, right? So it was quite the struggle just getting it out of the truck and in the house. And I was like, "Oh no, I'm gonna have to come back with some friends or something to make this happen." And her housekeeper was there, and her housekeeper was this like muscly woman, like a bodybuilder looking chick, and she's like, "Oh, I can help you." And so she basically carried it down down the stairs. Like she was like I was like holding one end of it, but like I could tell like she was lifting most of the weight. And so she took it down there. So she saved me on that deal, the housekeeper.
That's funny. Yeah. I I know. I feel like my days of moving very heavy things downstairs are over. I would I would
Yeah.
much rather offer some enterprising young man some money that wants to pad his bank account a little bit. I'm just
Yeah, the older I get, the more and more I start thinking about hiring somebody. Like when I first started, I was like, "There's no way I'm ever going to hire anybody. I like working by myself, make my own hours." But like, if I want to keep building big projects and things, it's becoming more and more necessity that I at some point should take on some type of apprentice or part time worker or helper or something.
yeah, I think we all hit that point at some point in our lives where it's like, well, either I've got to shrink what I'm doing down to a size that my grandmother could bench press, or, or I've got to get another set of hands here. So,
Yeah, for sure.
well, interestingly enough, I'll share a little bit of what I've been working on. There was a big company out of California that supplied acoustic guitar builders their tooling and some of the things that it takes to build acoustic guitars. And they went out of business here at the end of 2023 and left just an absolutely gaping hole out there in the luthier world. So I've spent I knew they were going out of business at some point in the fall, and was trying to sort out whether or not I could position myself to fill that hole. And so I spent pretty much the tail end of November, the entirety of December and January designing and starting to prototype side bending forms. I guess you'd call it a side bending heater, doing the electronics for temperature controls for heated blankets, and then starting to order actual units from overseas and things of that nature to see if I could assemble all the pieces and parts that I needed to assemble. Unfortunately, I've learned that you really can't buy any electronics that are made in the United States. That's one thing my guitar company takes huge pride in, is that we're all made in the U.S. I don't have fabrication done overseas or anything like that. And I've been trying to source electronic components that I can use in some of these designs, and they don't exist here. Everything's made in either China or Taiwan. I think some of the higher end electronics are maybe Japanese made, but they don't mess with things of this nature. So dealing with some of our overseas friends at 3 in the morning, trying to get answers and work through problems and understand their screen printing capabilities, their laser cutting capabilities, and things like that. And good news is I've come out the other side of that, and the prototypes are all working, which is fantastic. So now it's a matter of tooling up for the production on those. And I've actually enlisted the help of some of my YouTube friends to do some production. Some of the guys I know out there who have the big 5x10 CNC machines that can cut up sheets of MDF and Baltic birch plywood in nothing flat. So we're gearing up in Skyscraper to not necessarily change our focus, but to add a completely new department to the company, which is going to be pretty cool.
Right. So is this still kind of top secret stuff, or do you want to share a little bit about what these parts are?
I can absolutely share. They're going to be so we've got a big target, which I think, just in general, as things go, having deadlines and targets, I think are ways to really put your nose to the grindstone, right? If you say I'm going to have it done by this date, generally we get things done by the date we have to get them done. That's what deadlines are for. And we have a guitar show here in late March in Colorado. And so I'm going to be debuting all these new products at that guitar show. So it's attended heavily by acoustic guitar builders and lightly by electric guitar builders, is what I would say. There's probably 3-to-1 acoustic builders to electric builders. So just makes a whole lot of sense to bring that stuff to that venue and show it off. But yeah, I can absolutely talk about that stuff.
Yeah. So what do you think is going to be like the newest number one seller out of that line?
Yeah, I've spent an awful lot of time on my side bending machine, and anyone who builds guitars, acoustic guitars, has to bend some very thin sides, and the way you do that is you can either steam them or bend them over a heat pipe with a torch, or it's my wife. My wife runs all of our logistics for Skyscraper Guitars. I bet she's coming down here to get some things going out the door. Anybody who builds acoustic guitars has to bend the sides, and you can bend them over a pipe with a torch in it, or you can use some more modern techniques. And one of those techniques is to use a heat blanket that can get up to about, really, you bend sides at maybe 350 degrees, somewhere in there. It depends on the species of wood and that sort of thing, but there's a technique where you make a sandwich out of some spring steel, the side that you want to bend in a heating blanket, and then you put it under pressure and bend it over a mold. And that's exactly what we're doing. We're building a mechanism for all that stuff to happen, which is not something I've invented from scratch. Those types of benders have been out. I can't remember his first name. His last name is Fox. The Fox bender is a very common thing that you see in guitar builders workshops, and this is a riff or a further iteration on the Fox bender that has a cantilevered press arm and some other really nice features like that.
Hey, so is this that heating element one of the things that you're having a hard time sourcing from overseas or here locally?
Well, yeah. So I'll hold up kind of a finished piece right now. So the finished piece is this. There's a temperature controller here. So it works basically like a thermostat. You plug a thermal couple in here, and then this will tell you what temperature you're at, and then you can set a target temperature. And then over here is kind of the heater side. So this is where the heating blanket plugs in, and then you can switch that circuit on and off. And when this demands heat, more heat, it pulls in a relay and energizes the heating blanket. What's really nice, like a lot of people who are into home brewing and things use a very similar type of a setup to regulate the temperature of their keg or whatever it is that they're doing. You also see it in powder coating ovens and things of that nature. And it actually allows you to control the duty cycle so that you don't burn out elements, and it allows you to control the temperature very accurately within about 2 degrees, so plus or minus a degree or two, which is really, really nice if you're doing something precise. And then for those who might be interested, the guts of this thing are pretty simple. So it's a solid state relay along with what do you call that? Not the cooling fins, but something along those lines.
Yeah.
And then this is the PID controller, and those things together, you can find all the bits and pieces on Amazon or wherever you want to find them, but it's assembling them in a way that allows it to work with the thing you're doing. And the probably the most difficult piece of this entire thing to find is the actual case that you build it in. Of all things, there's a bunch of I think they call them project boxes out there, but finding one that fits the components in nice and compact and has enough room for all the cutouts in it was an absolute trick. And finally found a company that would make one that was kind of to my specs, which worked out really well. So yeah, those are some of the challenges. And interestingly enough, like I said, you can get on Amazon and buy the components, but if you go out and really do your homework again on the overseas market, and become the importer, you can bring the prices down by a substantial amount as far as what they cost me to build them, because I'm buying 100 at a time, enough components to buy 100 at a time. And I can put these out into the market for just slightly more than it would cost somebody to buy all the components and do it on their own. So, when you add it up, to me, there's got to be a value proposition that works out when you're making a product, right? If somebody says, well, you're charging $200 for this and I can buy all the components for $35, why would I pay you to assemble it, right?
Well,
Versus,
I,
go
I
ahead.
would pay you to assemble it because I don't necessarily have the knowledge to assemble it. I mean, I as a maker, I could probably figure it out, but there are a lot of people that just want to build the guitar,
Yeah.
and so they don't want to want to try to go through all the rigor of figuring that out. And then also, there's a little bit of a liability thing for them if they got the wrong heating element or wrong cooling
Yeah.
thing or whatever, and that all of a sudden their unit is on fire.
Yeah, and there's huge value in having a warranty, right? Somebody
Right.
who will replace components if something fries out and whatever else. And I realize that too. But I guess where I'm trying to go is there's I think if you try and pick up all the components to build one of these, all the electronic components to build one of these, you're probably dropping $100 bill on just that. If you were to hop on Amazon, buy all the bits and pieces, and then you put a case in there, and then all the wiring and crimp connectors and things of that nature, you're probably 100 and a quarter, maybe, sometime by the time you get
Yeah.
it done. And I think our target price point is right around $150 for that thing to go out the door, which uh, I think is a pretty darn good value for everybody that may want one. But then, kind of backing it up and looking at, well, yeah, buying components like I'm buying them in bulk really does drive that price down. So there's enough margin in there to make it worth our time. So there's the thing that I would say when you're designing something like an electrical circuit, understanding what those parameters are, I think is pretty important. The last thing you want to do is put something out there that isn't going to sell, because there's an insane amount of hours in figuring out this simple little thing and how to make it not just work. The proof of concept went really fast. That was maybe an evening. I did it with my dad just over a year ago, actually, in his basement. That was a piece of cake. It was figuring out how to get this thing manufactured with tight tolerances so that when you hit the on and off button, it's not moving around. It doesn't feel weak. When you pull the cord out of it, it doesn't pull the whole thing apart. you know,
Yeah.
those types of things that you have to stress test them. And that's why If you look at this one, I've got, you can't, here we go. There it is. The side of this thing is melted. The front of this thing is super glued back together because of some laser cutting things. There were a lot of things in the prototype. The first prototype, not the proof of concept, but the actual first, here's how we're going to make this prototype. This thing went together and came apart probably 50 or 60 times before every screw was in the right place, every wire was the right length, and there's nothing getting crimped or pinched or anything like that, because I know for a fact these things are going to go into a box and they're going to bounce down the highway in the back of a semi, and then the last 20 feet of the delivery is probably going to include some airmail in it landing
Right.
on somebody's stair.
Yeah.
So trying to make this thing in a fashion that's going to be rigid enough just to hold up through shipping is a feat in and of itself. I know people might laugh at that a little bit, but it's truly one of the biggest considerations you make when you're putting something like that together. So that's one component. And then the other is the actual bending forms and experimenting with it's going to be a flat pack situation, right? So there's going to be 5 pieces of lumber that go into a box, flat packed with some fasteners, and then somebody has to assemble it. So getting it to a point where someone can assemble it accurately without having any machine shop tools. Because you're bending guitar sides that are 80 thousandths thick. So how thick is 80 thousandths? Just over a 16th of an inch. So a 16th of an inch is 62 and a half thousandths. And so just over 16th of an inch thick. And then you have to sand them so that they're perfectly flat, right? So if you have a ripple in that side, and I'm talking, along the width, the 6-inch width or the 5-inch width of it, you have to sand that out. Well, you're starting with just over a 16th of an inch. There's not a whole lot of wiggle room
Yeah.
before you start sanding through the entire thing. So again, you have to be able to assemble this thing with precision and accuracy so that you don't have, you're probably wanting them to get within a 64th or less of where it needs to be. So there's a
Huh.
lot that goes into how that happens.
So the curved shape, how are you going? It's going to be flat, and then they have to bend that to fit a form to
Yeah.
build the form on?
Yeah, I got to be careful here because I've got a logo on one of my prototypes that I can't share yet.
Okay, well
Because
then,
but I'll cover it up. It'll be okay.
okay.
Um, so there we go. So there's the bending form. So it's 6 inches wide, and then it gets covered up with some spring steel, and then the piece you're bending, and then the heating blanket on top of that. And then there's a press that comes down, and my fingers like right over the waist there. There's a press that comes down in the waist, and then there's two pieces that press down the sides as you bend them. So those 3 pieces of MDF there have to be very accurate they have to be very planar to one another, which you cut them on the CNC and they're all identical, within a very, very small tolerance, maybe 5 thousandths of each other. But then assembling the 3 of them together with wood screws and trying to make that accurate is a little bit of a trick to make it work. And we wound up doing a rabbeted and notched piece that connects the 3 pieces so that it positively locks into the centerpiece, and then the 2 outer pieces can square off that and be parallel to the other face, and then you can align them against a fence. So just any piece of straight lumber, or whatever you want, a piece of steel, it doesn't matter. And once you do that, everything sort of snaps together square. So anyway, that was a fun journey trying to
Yeah.
make all of that happen. I think what you saw in the photo there was probably the 5th or 6th iteration of that, and the prior iterations I couldn't get square. I couldn't get them to line up without major without it taking, call it 15 to 20 minutes to get them to line up perfectly. So, anyway, that's been really fun to iterate on.
Yeah, you just want them to be able to take it out of the box and, like, snap them into place. Yeah,
Mhm.
it's amazing of how many products out on the market don't have that amount of thought put into the usability from the end user. In a past podcast, I mentioned I bought a bunch of metalworking Harbor Freight tools, and a lot of people make fun of Freight for falling apart, but most of my Harbor Freight tools haven't really fallen apart. They're just not very accurate or user
Yeah.
friendly because no one put that extra thought into the development of the tool. The tool itself is a motor bolted onto a metal fixture of some kind over almost across all of Harbor Freight stuff. It's like some kind of casting with some kind of cheap motor bolted to it, but the casting is never very accurate. There's not
Yeah.
very well thought out.
And that's one of my beefs. People pick on Harbor Freight tools a little bit, and rightfully so in a lot of instances. But I would challenge you to go into Home Depot or Lowe's or Menards or pick your box store and pick up some of their tools. They have the same exact problems. They just have a different logo on them. Now, when you get into your professional grade tools, you don't see as many problems. The one that I'll point out is I bought a biscuit joiner at one point in my life, and from Home Depot or Lowe's, one of the box stores. And I got it home and just right out of the box, couldn't, not that it wasn't square. I'm okay with squaring up tools, right? Like I said,
Right.
they rattle down the back of in the back of a semi down the highway for hours on end and then get tossed around and up on shelves and everything else. So I get that something may not be perfectly square out of the box, but I could not get it to the fence and the blade to be parallel. I couldn't get it there from here. and
Yeah.
and that's a non-starter for me. So, the first one went back and I picked up the second one. The second one had the same issue, so I took it back, and the third one had the same issue, and I gave up and said, "Okay, we've got to move on." And it wasn't a bad tool manufacturer. I can't remember which one it was, but it wasn't like a terrible name or anything like that. But wound up moving on to I don't know if it was a Makita or something else that was a little bit higher end prosumer, I would call it. And finally wound up with a unit that would cut biscuits that were parallel. Because
Yeah.
you know how that goes, right? Like they form an X if you're pushing it one way and then the other. If you don't have it parallel, they form an X and not a plane, and you can't have that. So
Right. Yeah. I mean, that even happens in like the pro line. Like my Laguna bandsaw, when I assembled it and I went to open the door to install the blade, the door hit the bolt that bolted the bandsaw to the base. And so I had to remove that bolt just to have the door swing open and close. Now, to Laguna's credit, in an updated version of the same tool, the 1412 bandsaw, now they have a notch on the door so it clears the bolt. So they've addressed it and fixed it. Not every manufacturer does that, but
I can't remember exactly what I did, but if we're telling war stories like that, I've got I think it's a 19-inch Rikon bandsaw that I bought, costing an awful lot of money. And the first day that I had it in my shop, I had my angle grinder out grinding grinding things to give them clearance to make the tool work like I needed it to work. And of course, the first time somebody sees you do that, they freak out. You're cutting on a $2,000 saw, and it's not even a day over old yet. And my answer is always, well, the tool is a starting spot, and you have to form that tool to what your needs are. And if that means you break out your angle grinder or your drill or whatever it is, I mean, there's a lot of people who have custom hold downs and things of that nature on saws like that, or on tools like that. Maybe not on saws like that, but yeah, go ahead. It's your tool. You own it now, right? There's nothing sacred there. If it's not working exactly like you need it to work, do what you got to do.
yeah, there's all kinds of tools in my shop that I've modified or something broken. So my fix wasn't to order a new part. It was just to make the part and glue it on there, screw it on there, or whatever. Yeah, for
Yeah,
sure.
the old farmer mentality. It'll take you a long way. Um,
Yeah.
well, so let's see. Let's flip back to you a little bit. You said you have the table going on right now. Is there anything else either kind of started over in the corner in the wings waiting to happen once the table comes out, or
Yeah, let me share my my screen here. This is next up in line here after the base.
oh wow.
So that's my new bed design, and it was kind of a spin-off of the door that I built a couple years ago now, a year ago now,
Hmm.
for the Wood Whisperer Guild. This won't be a Wood Whisperer Guild project. The timeline to get it done is not to wait for a cameraman on this particular project. Maybe in the future, I don't know, but yeah, so that's the next build. So it's got a little bit of a combination of green and mission style kind of mashed together there. Proportion wise, I'm pretty happy with it. The headboard there, I might make it a little bit shorter. It feels a little tall. It might just be the angle of my rendering, but I'll probably play with that over the next week or so while I finish up the table base. But
So I've got to ask, what's the material that you're going to have? I'll call it in the openings there at the top of the headboard and the top of the footboard.
yeah, so for those that are listening to the podcast, I'll put some pictures of this, or you can jump over to our YouTube channel. But to describe this thing, it is the frame of the bed is made from cherry, and then it has upper divider lights on the head and footboard, and then some lower panels. And the lower panels are walnut, and the upper divider lights will be like a curly maple or some kind of figured maple. And the reason why I went with kind of a figured maple look is because if you look at like a green um, door or a green type lights, there's a lot of decorative stained glass work that kind of really accents and makes their work pop. So I didn't want to get into stained glass in a bed. So that's kind of my play on the design of to have a really highly figured wood in replace of the glass.
That is going to be absolutely gorgeous, Brian. And I'm not just saying that. That is
Thanks.
the pieces that are catching my eye as a designer. There's two things that stick out on the arch that you have, that little detail where you're putting an offset in it. I don't know if you picked that up from somewhere else or if that's your detail, but then you carry it around to the sideboard and then you carry it around to the headboard, and then the light dividers on the headboard have a similar offset in them. I think that motif going both horizontal and vertical on the bed are those are just fantastic little elements, Brian.
Yeah, that element is my rendition, and it's like 7 or 8 renditions down the line over the years of what a green cloud lift would be. So green
Mm-hmm.
cloud lifts are a little bit more straight with 2 little, crooks in them, and this is more of a swoop with a big crook in it. Again, I don't know if
The
crook's the right word, but it my I when I was showing it to my wife, I told her, like, I feel like it's a more modern, rendition of a cloud lift.
Yeah, I agree. The other thing that I see is on the edges of the legs, both at the headboard and the footboard, is almost a trestle style detail. It looks like there's a little bit of an inset where you get the top and the bottom curve. Maybe those are parallel and flush, and I'm just seeing a line there. But it's an interesting detail. It's just a little shadow line. It looks like
Are you talking about just this
that
swoosh
right.
right here, this curve?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah, so that does have a little bit of a curve out. Um, I kind of was playing around with that detail. Daryl Peart at the if those of you are not familiar with Daryl Peart is uh very hard into the green. He is probably like the foremost expert on green that's still alive these days. And he's a furniture maker that designed a lot of furniture in the green style. And so he has a very hard curve. And hard curves aren't really like my style. I like something that kind of swoops in and swoops out, eases in. And so this was kind of my rendition on his curve. So his comes very sharp down and then curves in. This
Hmm.
kind of is a swoop.
Well, that's going to be an absolutely stunning piece. I can tell it already, and I think your gut feeling that the headboard might be a little tall. I might agree with that, and I know this isn't a big critique session. That's
But
not the
yeah,
point
no,
of our talk, but I agree with you there. The proportions of that headboard, which again, it probably depends on what's the room that it's going in, and some of those other things. And just thinking out loud, I know my wife, for one, loves to put about 30 pillows on a bed. So by the time you stack up enough fluffy pillows there, that might be the right height.
yeah.
So, uh,
Yeah, yes, this is true. My wife has a bazillion pillows as well. So pillow heavy, not pillow heavy, but I think this braille is going to move down, and then I'm going to move, like, this will move down maybe an inch, and then this will move down 2 inches because I think that these lights are just too tall,
yeah,
almost out of proportion.
I think your gut's good there. And what I would say is there's a balance to those dividers in the light, and it looks like the top section and the bottom section, so the narrow section and the wide section, are the same dimension, same height. And having one of those take precedent might help that, and just a little bit, like that 2 inches would be enough.
Yeah.
If it were me, and again, this isn't me designing it for Brian, that's not my point, but I would pick one, and it goes back to one of the design rules, right? One is a monolith, two is a pair, and three is hierarchy. And so you start asking yourself, is this a situation where I need one thing to dominate the other, and that sort of thing? But it even as it is, with no modifications, I think this would be an absolute stunner.
Thanks. Yeah, I'm really excited about getting it going. So I'm hoping I can get this table base finished up this weekend so I can start on this guy on Monday.
Isn't that the craziest thing in the world, when you have projects lined up and you're finishing a project that you're really excited about, but you're so much more excited about the one that's
Yeah, that
still sitting in
happens.
board form on the shelf?
Yeah, that happens all the time. Even if I'm just in the design stage of, like, I try to always have like a project that's on its way out of the shop, a project that's on its way into the shop, and then a new client that I'm designing something for. And oftentimes, the new client that I'm designing something for is the shiny new thing that I just want to, like, all right, screw these other two things. I'm ready to build this new shiny thing. But I think that's
Yeah.
just human nature.
I've got, my goodness. Interestingly enough, I chatted with a gentleman who's pretty well respected in the acoustic guitar building arena, is how I would say it. He lives here in Colorado, and visited him over at his house and kind of walked through some of the things that I'm doing on the acoustic guitar tooling side of things. And he was a wealth of information, first off, but then he's, oh yeah, I've had people calling me about this, and I've had people calling me about that. He stacked up about 10 projects on my list in the matter of about 15 minutes. I'm like, you realize it's my timeline is generally a year from the time I get the idea, and sketch it for the first time, till the time I'm pooping out the first units. And this represents probably 3 years worth of work, but we're trying to fill this void that was left by the company that closed. So I'm trying to fast track some of this process. So I've been doing weekends where I'm actually, I've got 2 or 3 prototypes cooking at a time. One's on the computer where I'm working out the cam, the other's on the CNC, and the other is, I'm working on the assembly. And then, as you go through and kind of do your critique of the first article, there's, okay, I need to make another one, but I need to make these 6 changes. And by the way, that affects everything else I'm working on. So I need to halt those things for a minute. But it's funny how that works. I mean, I'm in a mode right now, and I'm sure you probably get here all the time, where I'm actually ordering material this week for something I know I won't work on for 2 months, but I need to get that material stacked up and measured so that the models are accurate. Cause again, these are going to be production items. And so we get down to, if you're going to have something fit together, it's got to be within just a few thousandths to make it snap together and be square and all those kind of things. So, you know, uh, having the material on hand is a must. You can't use nominal dimensions in manufacturing models, which is kind of a different mindset that I don't know if everybody completely understands.
Yeah. Well, the lawsuits of the big box stores and lumber yards over two by fours proves that most people don't understand what a nominal dimension is. But
Yeah.
yeah, keeping materials on hand is a kind of a big thing, and keeping everything moving. This wood for this bed is sitting on top of the table saw right now while I grinding away at this removing my first attempt of patina on the table base, and it just kills me that it's just sitting there. And of course, grinding, all that dust falls all over the place, a huge mess. But yeah, I have material that for projects, just passion projects that I've like, oh, you know what, that would be perfect for this idea I have. And so I have this live edge slab that I've had for maybe 3 years now, and I've just never had time to do it. And then this thing right here, this live edge stump, I guess, part of a stump tree that I bought that for a project that I had in my mind, but the client projects come first.
I
So I
think
got stuff stacked all over the place.
we did a show where we talked a little bit about that at one time. But interestingly enough, and every time you mention something like that, Brian, I look over into my wood stash in the corner over here. I've got 20 years worth of guitars, worth of lumber for guitar building next to me here at my desk. And I often think through, I know what's in each and every box and stack, and they're all saran wrapped together so that they compress and don't warp and everything like that. And I know exactly what's in each one of them. And some of the some of the timber that I've bought, I had sliced into guitar sets, so whatever for a back, it might be uh about an eighth of an inch thick is about where I start. And then sides, like I said, we're about 80 thousandths. But there's every tree that I buy or every piece of lumber that I buy that I have resawn, there might be 10 sets in there. And then, so I know I'll make one of those guitars, and then that piece of wood will go off to the side for a year or two while I make other guitars out of other trees. And then I'll come back to it and I've got, 7 or 8 more guitars to build out of that one log. So kind of fun to think of what that might look like. And I'm, with this venture into the acoustic guitar side of things, I'm getting closer and closer to being able to spit some of those guitars out in a production fashion, which will be super exciting.
Yeah. So is this? I can't remember exactly, but I remember you were doing a bending form with a vacuum bag trying to bend a
Yeah.
guitar. Is this new tool, heating tool, to replace that
No,
function, or is that still something that you'd have to do?
this is step one in side bending. So you bend the sides, and as you can well imagine, there's some spring back that happens
Mhm.
after heat bend aside, unless unless you can apply tremendous pressure, which takes steel forms and a big hydraulic press and all those kind of things. That's how the big boys do it. But if you bend sides in this way, they will all spring back. I don't care who you talk to. Everybody has the same issue. And so you wind up doing one of two things. You put those sides into what's called an outside form. So instead of like what I showed was the inside, like a plug, the outside form has the outside and then a rib around it. And then you use spreaders and you spread your guitar sides in there, and then you brace them and do all that kind of stuff. Or you laminate two pieces together in a vacuum bag, like you mentioned, Brian, and then you epoxy those two pieces together, and it becomes a composite lamination, and those don't move. And so there's pluses and minuses to both sides of that. The plus is that it's incredibly stiff when you laminate the two together with epoxy. The downside of it is you actually get a little bit thicker side. And you could say it's a downside. It's also an upside, depending on how you're designing the acoustics of the instrument. If you're wanting the sides to be a little more alive, then it's probably a negative. But if you want your sides to be more rigid, so that all of the energy comes out of the top, then it's a positive. So, but yes, one of the other pieces to this puzzle is that plug I showed has 3 ribs to it, right? And if you were to use that in a vacuum press, the vacuum would suck it in between those ribs, and you would wind up with a cross section that looked like a W. So I've actually, kind of one of our differentiators is I've actually made ribs that will fill in those gaps. So you can use this form for the bending, but then you can also use it for vacuum forming as well. The vacuum forming piece, I've struggled with the assembly of it because there's so many pieces. There's 15 or 16, I think there's 16 pieces that have to come together to form that.
All at once inside the bag?
All well, all at once to make the form itself.
Oh, okay.
So when someone is assembling that form at their house, right? Like they're not going to have a granite surface table to to lay this thing on with an angle block that makes it perfectly 90 degrees and all those things. In my shop, I can assemble it perfect within a couple thousandths of an inch, so you just take your 80 grit sandpaper over the top of it and it would be perfectly flat. But most people don't have the ability. And it also took me, what did I have to have? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I had to have 6 blocks cut to specific dimensions to be able to clamp the thing and put pressure evenly across. There's 7 ribs that go across to make 6 inches with 3/4 inch material. I think that's right. 7, or is it 8? Shoot, it's probably 8. No, it's an odd number. It's 7. So there's 7 ribs that go across there to make a 6-inch piece. I think I'm right. No, I'm not. It's 8. Dang it. But that said, aligning 8 pieces of lumber, like you've tried to clamp multiple layers of things together, getting them accurate within a couple thousandths of an inch is almost impossible. It's very, very difficult. So I've got some ideas for alignment pins that I think are going to make that work. And once I get that sorted out, then our vacuum form pieces will be available. So it's a thing where you'll buy the 3 rib piece first, and then if you want to use it for a vacuum form, it'll be an add-on. So I'll send you those pieces either in the same box or in a separate order, so you can do them at a later date. You don't have to make that decision on day one. But yeah, that's been, as far as figuring out the manufacturing of those things. Number one, they don't lay out very well right now on a piece of plywood or a piece of MDF. There's not much yield out of a large piece of lumber, so they're very inefficient. So I'm trying to figure out if I can break it into multiple pieces to make it easier to lay out and nest on a big board, or if I need to stick with what I've got, but then find some other pieces that we're making that would fill in some of those blank areas and make it a little more economical.
Yeah, there's a lot of things to think about in vacuum forming, and then once you get your form built, the failure rate is pretty high sometimes on things. I have this idea for a sculpture that I want to do, and it would be like this big bent lamination thing, and I have a 9-foot long bag, and it's going to take up almost the whole bag, and my tests have not have not yielded well, have not my test has made firewood, and, with epoxy, you can't that's not good firewood.
No, it's not. But, one of the things that I will point out, if you're brave enough and you mess something up that's glued together with epoxy, you can get it back apart. So if, again, if you're using the piece of wood out of the magical tree and, you need to get it back, you can absolutely get it back if it's glued crooked, but it's not fun. You have to really want it, and it's going to make you work for it, but you can get them back apart with a
Yeah,
heat gun and some artist palette knives and things like that. So, and I've got, so I did those laminated sides. I did 4 of them, and 2 of them came out beautiful and 2 of them came out not so good. And I have a date with a heat gun and and some palette knives
yeah,
in my not so distant future to get those back apart, because of course, uh, the sides are all book matched. So I I
yeah.
don't have another piece that can fit the sequence, unfortunately.
Yeah,
Um,
well, thankfully for this stuff, it was just some, just your everyday cheap cherry, from the scrap
yeah,
pile. But yeah, things go. You think, oh, it works great. You do a dry run, okay, perfect. As soon as you put glue on it, something is either now too tacky and it doesn't slide like it did before, or now it's like with epoxy, it's super slick and
oh yeah,
and then all of a sudden nothing's holding together anymore, not on the buck properly, or the bag. My least favorite thing is the bag will suck up underneath between the buck and the piece, and it's like, you're gonna rip the bag and trying to, yeah, it's a mess.
that's
Yeah.
uh that's what happened on mine. Is the bag got in between the 2 laminations, so there's a gap in one spot on both of
Oh,
them. And
yeah, no.
and you can imagine, right? Like, you've got forms that are already bent going on to a buck that's bent slightly differently because the pieces have sprung back, and they all spring back slightly differently. so so you it's a little bit like wrestling a greased pig. You're holding down one spot and looking at everything else and trying to pull the bag free. I think uh i think the average was probably pulling vacuum on the bag 10 times before I thought everything was in place. And I'm learning. I think one of the things I'll do, again, guitar building being the precision type of operation that it is, there are people who've come up with some great tricks for aligning fretboards to necks, where a fretboard is tapered and the neck may not be cut yet. And when you glue it and clamp it, everything just wants to squirt around. Like, there's no keeping that thing where you want it. But I've seen some guys that are actually dry fitting, and they get the dry fit perfect with their clamps and everything else. And then they'll take hot glue and glue pieces, just little pieces as alignment things. And so when you put the clamps on, it's going to want to squeeze into your alignment pins. And the more clamps you put on it, the tighter it gets and the more perfect it fits. And so I've got to come up with something along those lines for doing those laminated sides, where you can put some guides along the form and be able to control, if something were to squirt a little bit, it can only move this direction or that direction. So you're not, you the issue for me was I was trying to control 3 planes at the same time, X, Y, and Z. And you don't have enough hands for that.
Yeah, yeah, especially when you turn the vacuum pump on, you sit there for 10 minutes waiting for the bag to evacuate, nothing happens. Then all of a sudden, within 2 seconds, you're like, shit, I missed it.
Yeah, no, it is humbling the first couple times that you do a vacuum setup. And what's the way you practice that, right? Just go ahead and Vaseline all your pieces up and throw them in the bag and turn it on. That's your dry run. That's really the only way to simulate it without messing something up. But um anyway, it should be. I'm trying to think through all those things, because there are people who want to do those types of operations out there that really don't have time for the R&D. And I want to go back to something that you said earlier. with making some of these electronic components and some of that stuff. My goal is, interestingly enough, if you're going to build your very, very first acoustic guitar, even electric guitar, you spend so much time making jigs and fixtures. You'll spend 3/4, maybe more of your time making jigs and fixtures to make everything go. And then you spend this very small amount of time building the guitar that you want to build. And what my hope is that I can put things out on the market that will allow people to get back that 3/4 of their time and spend all of their time focusing on the guitar without having to spend a considerably larger amount of money on the tools and fixtures that it takes. And one of the things that I'll share here, Brian, is I'm developing a rental program for some of these tools. So to put it in perspective, an acoustic, somebody building their first acoustic guitar might spend $2,000 on tools. And when I say tools, I mean forms and fixtures and things of that nature that are specifically for guitar building, not saws and drills and things like that, but on forms and doodads. And my goal, because I think that's a barrier to entry. There's a lot of people who can't afford, you're going to spend $1,000 in lumber and hardware, and then another $2,000 on top of that in tools and fixtures that you may never use again because you may not like building a guitar. And so my goal is to have a little bit of some sort of a rental program where a young guitar builder, somebody who wants to get into it but maybe not make the huge investment, can rent for a month and build, bend as many sides as they can bend in a month. Go through all your scraps, get all the breaks out of your system, figure out how to do it, and then be able to bend, a couple, 3 or 4 or 5, 10 guitars worth of sides, and then be able to return the unit and, not have to worry about the burden of that investment. But then if they want to turn around in 2 or 3 months and rent it again, and then, a few times a year, be able to track that and say on the 5th time that they rent it, it's theirs. And I think that's a unique model. So it allows somebody maybe to sell a few guitars and be able to kind of pay as they go without having to make that huge investment up front. Nobody else out there is doing that. I may shoot myself in the foot here. I may have all my competition develop rental programs here in the next 2 months.
Well, we
But
can always edit it out if you want.
no, it's fine. It's on my website already. I have a
Ah,
rental section, and I've said it's coming. And I've had a lot of really positive response to that. But the other thing that gives me freedom for is I can put out these first units that I've been working on without the fear of a warranty. So really understand, are they going to make it through the mail? And the worst that can happen in this instance is somebody sends the unit back and I refund their money. No big deal. But I think what's really going to happen is they're going to test it, and I'm going to get some good real world feedback from everybody and be able to improve the products that we're putting out there, which is kind of the end goal, to put out some
yeah.
really cool stuff.
So are you talking about like renting the vacuum bag, the vacuum pump, and the heating element along with all the forms? So it's like this big kit that comes.
Yeah. And it'll probably be scalable. So say there's somebody who's quite capable of doing the form work out of MDF, right? Anybody can do that. You've got a set of plans and whatever. So maybe I just need to rent the heating unit itself with the heating blanket, and then the press to get the curves in there. But then they're going to make their own guitar form. Cool. We can rent just that piece. If there's somebody who says, no, I want the whole thing to be able to bend aside, I want a turnkey unit to be able to bend sides, great. Then I want the turnkey unit to bend sides, but then I also want a vacuum form. We'll probably have some options for that as well. I don't know if I'll be sending a vacuum pump back and forth through UPS, and specifically because of the size and the weight of those. I think at some point you get a diminishing return there. There's some folks out there who make some DIY vacuum kits. I've got one that works on the Venturi effect that was
Mhm.
fairly inexpensive. I want to say it was maybe 150, $200 to build my own. So I'll probably let the pump go, but be able to do all the forms and things of that nature. So you'll have the buck, the vacuum buck, and then the outside forms that somebody could rent and be able to send back. Um, and then again with the notion that if they want to rent it 5 times, or I don't know what the magic number is going to be, but I'm throwing 5 times out there that it'll just be theirs. And I don't think there's a lot of people out there willing to take that kind of risk on some young builders, but uh, I want more people to be able to experience guitar building. And so if I can lower the height of that hurdle, that's what my intention is to do.
Yeah, for sure. And as guitar building or building a guitar has always been something that I've thought in the back of my head that'd be cool, or some kind of stringed instrument, a violin or something. But like the complexity of it all uh is kind of intimidating to get started,
Oh yeah.
especially since I don't play the guitar. I'm a saxophone player, not a guitar player. So it'd be really hard for me to like to put all this time into this thing that I wouldn't be able to enjoy. I'd just be like, okay, I built it. Like, what do I do with it now?
I'll come over and play it anytime,
All
Brian.
right.
You just tell me
Cool.
when you get one done. Um, it's I'm not going to say it's a rite of passage, but there are a lot of people. Matt Cremona and April, I think, went over to Ben Crow's place there in the UK and built guitars with him. I
Oh
think
yeah, I forgot about that. That's a long time ago.
it was.
Yeah.
I
I
got.
wonder if Matt even plays.
I don't think he does. I think I talked to him about it.
Mm.
Um, I was excited that he was doing it because I think a well-known woodworker like that going over and experiencing a guitar build and kind of documenting that, I think opened some people's eyes to the fact that yes, mortals can
Can
build
build a
guitars.
guitar. Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, yeah. Well, so let's see. Have you got anything beyond the bed project on the drawing boards? Are you in the beginning stages of thinking through some design ideas, Brian?
I do. Um, One is this slab that's behind me, this little crotch of the tree stump trunk is the bottom of the tree, I think, something along those lines. But that'll be a coffee table, but I wanted to do some kind of sculptural base on it. So I have that kind of kicking around in the back of my head. I have it in my head looking good, but then when I drew it, it looks terrible. So I don't that's why it's still sitting there. It's hard to pull the trigger on it. And then I want to do another bench with a stone
Yeah.
through it. That original YouTube video, the original one, the views have really died off on that. So I'm not getting anybody yelling at me. I should have just cut the top of the stone off. So I need to revitalize the trolls, and I want to do kind of more of a more modern, more modern one that I can sell. The original one has this big arch, and then it has these supports that I did through tenons through these arch. So it's a curved mortise, and that was really very time consuming to do. So and also it's kind of fragile the way it's built. So that has to be sold as more of an art piece. I want something that can take a little bit more of a beating that I would be comfortable to ship across the country after I build it, kind of a thing, and sell it to somebody. So
Very
those two
cool.
things, and then I have a handful of ideas that I don't want to necessarily put out there yet because they're still in the hopper and the way YouTube works. You say one thing and then 10 guys beat you to it because that's their gig is making YouTube videos.
Of course. Yep. Yep. The next river table, what's it going to be?
Yeah, what are you gonna embed into your epoxy next? Some
That's
Fruit
right.
Loops and Legos and whatever they got going on these days.
That's right.
Crayons. Someone did a crayon, said a river of epoxy, they did a river of crayon. I don't know who that was, but I was like,
Yeah.
all right, whatever.
Yeah. I've seen the colored pencils. I don't know if I saw the crayons, but yeah, I've seen a number of things out there buried under epoxy, which is
Yeah.
fine
Well,
if
the
that's what
crayons
you're
was
into.
even buried into epoxy. It was just poured in the crack. So I don't think
Oh,
it's very durable
oh.
of a table. But if you want to color your floor, you can just flip your coffee table over and
Well,
rub it
well,
around.
or you could just set a piece of paper on top of it and just do a rubbing, and
Oh
you'd
yeah,
have
that'd be
an
cool.
imprint.
See
Oh,
that?
that
See, I
might
shouldn't be making fun of it because now there's all kinds of cool things you could do with it.
yeah, that'd be a good exercise for the kiddos, I
Yeah.
suppose. Well, very cool. Well, uh, yeah, I don't know that I've mentioned it on our podcast, Brian, but I'm restoring an old Porsche 356 as well. That one's kind of waiting in the wings. Poor guy keeps looking at me, wondering when I'm going to get back to it. I haven't touched it since I want to say it was November, maybe late November, sometime. Maybe it was the first week of December. And we got into our end of year crunch in terms of production and keeping things in stock for the Christmas season on the tool side of things. And I had what seemed like an endless list of, and it's still going actually. Hey, I need more of these. I need more of these. My wife really cracks the whip when we go out of stock on things. Um, so I had a number of things to tend to, and with all the travel that we do over the holidays and that sort of thing, didn't have time to even look at the car. And then when we got back, starting to produce all these prototypes that I've been talking about. But my hope is, again, we've got a deadline in late March. My hope is that I can have all of my prototypes done and we can be into the production phase, which will be handled not by me, but by somebody else, and be able to maybe turn back toward the car and give it a little bit of love. But I'm really excited about getting that thing moving forward.
Yeah. Are you still going to be documenting it on your YouTube channel?
I
Yeah.
am, and I'm not sure. I started thinking about, I've been documenting it in some what I would call gory detail level of things, and I think I'm going to back off of that a little bit. There are some people out there that like that, but I've really gotten through what I would call the driver's side, so new rocker panels and longitudinals and all of those kind of pieces. I can't remember what you call the mud guard area of the fender, but that piece is in as well. And I got to do the passenger side, and the passenger side is basically going to be a repeat of the driver's side. There's nothing, there's no new material there other than it's all reverse. And
Yeah.
so I don't think I'm going to spend the time to document that, simply because if I move the cameras out of the way, I can probably move at 3 to 4 times the speed. And so if I can get the passenger side knocked out and then move on to the front fenders and hood and all that, the nose that has to be replaced, I think I can get there a lot quicker without the cameras in my way. And people will, I think my audience will enjoy seeing that more than they'll enjoy seeing a repeat of the left side
Yeah.
on the
Especially
right.
since it's the same thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, I will continue to document it for sure. I think I'm going to back out a little bit in terms of the level of detail that I'm covering, but when I run into something interesting, I'll show it. And when I need to back off and make some progress, I'll do that as well. That some of that work gets extraordinarily tedious, I'll say, and can be very frustrating because it's a almost 60-year-old car. No, 60 years old this year. Yeah,
Wow.
1964. So it's a 60-year-old car that's been banged up a little bit. So things aren't going to fit right out of the box. And anyway, it can get really frustrating, and having a camera in your way can sometimes prevent you from making the progress that you have to make. So um, just not having that distraction, I think, will be good sometimes.
Yeah, the last couple of projects I built, I didn't film. The last thing I filmed, I think, was a cribbage board
Yep.
thing, and that was specifically for YouTube because I wanted to sell plans and add to my, as you call them, ATM machines. I wanted to add a new downloadable plan to my ATM machine. But the last couple, I just need to get, the winter time is the hardest time to make money selling
Yeah.
home goods because people don't want to tear up their house during Christmas and things. So it's a matter of just like, all right, I got the project. I need to get it done, get paid, and get that money in the bank. And I just set the camera aside and just went after it.
That's smart. Yeah. I think sometimes we have to do that. And, I don't rely on my YouTube income. I'll just say it that way.
Yeah.
The YouTube income is what I affectionately refer to as the mama don't know money. If I want to buy something stupid or whatever, it used to pay my car payment every month. That's what I'll say there. It doesn't do that anymore because I don't put that volume of videos out there.
Is
So
that yeah.
at the end of the day, um, really the reason I document my car builds on YouTube is for other people that are doing the same type of project so that they can have a little, they can understand what goes into it, because there's no books out there that tell you how those things go together. I think people have some weird belief that they can find pictures of a dissected car, and those things don't exist from the factory for certain. So it's guys like me out there documenting how these things come apart and go back together that are the source of inspiration for some people. And I like being that guy. I think it's fun to explore and get into some things that you don't understand, but then it's also fun to share those things with other people and maybe help a car that's been stuck in somebody's garage for 30 years because they got stuck on a problem that they couldn't solve, helping them solve that problem. I can't tell you on the Carmen Gia side how many emails I've received over the years from people who were absolutely like, car had been sitting for over a decade because they got to a certain point and couldn't get it back together. They couldn't figure out a point to start from and measure. And something in my video tipped them off to how they could get that done. And then,
Nice.
I've gotten several people who sent me pictures of their finished car and, hey, this is because of the videos you put out on YouTube 20 years ago or whatever. And, there's some satisfaction there. And the satisfaction isn't that I taught somebody. The satisfaction for me is that there's another car back on the road that's a cool car that people get to drive and experience and look at and understand the history of that vehicle. So
Yeah, it's also like just preserving history. I can't imagine like my grandkids are going to be like, "Hey, we got to put this Honda back together, like restore this Honda." Like there's nothing that's worth restoring that's happened in the last 20 years, right? Like at least I feel that way. Like everything is just designed so to maximize profit, not beauty.
yeah, I think there are still some cars out there that are worthy of being restored. I mean, I'm looking at it now. So uh, I was thinking about this morning, and it blows my mind. Um, when I bought my Carmen Gia in 1992 when I graduated from high school, and it was a 1974 Carmen Gia. So that car was 18 years old when I bought it. And when I bought it, it was like a long gone classic, completely rusted out, just complete shit bomb. That car was awful. It should have gone to the junkyard. Let's be honest. And somebody had already restored it. So in 18 years of life, this car had been driven and wrecked. The motor had been rebuilt twice, I believe, and it had been restored and then sat in somebody's garage. And then when I bought it, it was in need of another restoration. Like that, that is a car that just wanted to die. And I bought it at 18 years old. Now in 2024, I look at an 18-year-old car is a 2006. That doesn't seem like a classic car to me.
Yeah, not at
And
all.
and I look at, what are those cars that are going to be candidates? Maybe the early 2000s, the late 1990s. And I look at cars like the Audi TT that's out there, some of the little I don't know if they called them roadsters, but there were some special edition TTs that are pretty darn cool cars that I wouldn't mind getting my hands on one that needed to be restored. I think they were pretty innovative for their time. I think you're going to see people that'll restore the modern Beetles too. Of course, I'm German car guy, but
Yeah.
uh, I think there are definitely some of those. And then the tail end of the air cooled Porsche era was 1996, I believe. So that was the last of the air cooleds, if I'm not mistaken. And those cars are starting to get restored now too. So
Yeah.
there are some gems out
It's
there,
like
and there's
culture.
some American cars for sure that fall into that category, and there are some other cars. you see a lot in the tuner world, a lot of the guys doing the Subaru thing, which I find fascinating that people enjoy that, or not enjoy that, but they really get into it. And I would not have thought of the Subaru as that platform, but they had a lot of really cool um, motor platforms that the WRX and the turbos that they have in some of those Subarus are pretty impressive little engines that fit in those cars. I can understand why people tune them, but it surprises me that people pick the brand of Subaru to hot rod.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
So along these lines of car culture, I got a little story that I think you would appreciate because of the German VW bug situation. So years and years ago, I worked at a flooring company selling flooring, right? And so um, these dudes roll up in this old Volkswagen bus, total surfer vibe, stoner vibe from these guys, right? They come in and they're like, "Hey man, we want some shag carpet for our van." And I was like, "All right, cool. How big of a piece do you need?" And he's like, "Oh, I don't know, man. Can you come out and measure it?" And I was like, "Sure." So we go out there and they open up the doors and just this big billow of green smoke just billows up out of this thing, and this dude's sitting there. He's like, "What's up, man?" And he's just smoking a blunt. And so I crawl in there and I measure it, and the rest of the day I was just like, because from the contact high. And we go in, we figure it all out. I show him some red shag carpet, like the new term frise, but it was the tallest frise I could find for these guys. And of course, their credit card was declined. And he's like, "Dude, I thought we had some money." And he's like, "No, man, we pulled all the money out of the ATM to buy the weed." It was just like this classic stoner thing. But yeah, I'll never forget those guys. That was a fun afternoon trying to sell
there
them carpet for their
the
van.
the hippie Volkswagen culture is a real thing. I've been around Volkswagens. I feel like my whole life. One of my aunts owned one when I was a little kid. She had a Beetle, and I sort of fell in love with the brand. Gosh, in grade school, and when I was able to buy one, my senior year of high school, it's like I thought I just died and gone to heaven, but started hanging around Volkswagen car shows and things like that. And I always say when I show up at a VW show, it's like I'm finally with my people again. And it's not that everybody's smoking weed and whatever else, but there's a certain mentality in the hippie culture that's like an easygoing, free riding, like take it easy. Like this is a totally chilled out thing. And you go to I want to say I still like muscle cars. I like every kind of car. I'm sort of agnostic that way, but I have my favorites. But when you show up to a muscle car event, there's a lot of adrenaline there. There's a lot of uh, uh, machismo is a good word, and guys that are just really into their cars. And it's sort of like Harley Davidson guys. They are really into their bikes, and that's cool. I love that, but it's not laid back enough for me. When you go to a Volkswagen show, there's generally a lot of cars in that show that have towels for seat covers and things of that nature. It's not about the spit, shine, and polish and perfection. It's more about the culture and the vibe of the car, and I really really dig that.
Yeah, has a lived in feel. One of my friends, Tony, he used to be a Deadhead, so he had followed the Grateful Dead around, and he had a little VW bus that he just tooled around and went from Grateful Dead show to Grateful Dead show, and he was basically homeless. He lived in his van
Yeah,
and just went from town to town following the
yeah.
Grateful Dead.
I was never able to do that. I was always gainfully employed from about 12 years on, 12 years
Yeah.
old on. So I was never able to go, be a deadhead or a fish head or Dave Matthews guy or, whoever tooling around the country. But I keep thinking, at some point when I retire, I might get the urban assault rig of some kind, the Mercedes Sprinter van, and maybe follow a couple bands around for a month or two and just experience not having to go to work and worry about things. But we'll see. We'll see if
Yeah.
that pans out for me.
Van life. If right now, van life's a big deal on YouTube. There's
Oh,
all
it
kinds
is.
of channels, people doing their vans.
It is, and I can appreciate that. I think that's such a cool thing, you know. As an architect and a car guy, those two things kind of melding together and your home becoming your vehicle or your vehicle becoming your home. There's something to that I think speaks to us, especially as Americans. Our cars are very important to us,
Yeah.
and I think there's some really interesting connection there with the van life.
Yeah, well, I told my wife if she leaves me or passes away, I'm selling this house and I'm going to buy a van to live in, but also buy a property with just a big tilt-up building for my shop. And so I'll have this little tiny van that I live in, and then everything else will be dedicated to making things.
I need to send you a link. There's a guy that I would, so he is a custom ski manufacturer. Okay.
All right.
And he will host anyone who wants to make their own custom skis. And he started in Mammoth, California, and had a shop there, you know, brick and mortar type situation, and decided that that wasn't for him, that he wanted to take his show on the road and be able to go wherever he wanted to go and be in a ski town in the winter, but then be somewhere else cool in the summer. And so he got a trailer frame of some kind and built a shop, a ski production shop on top of this trailer, along with
Nice.
a place to live. So his wife is a chef. And so he and his wife live together, doing this mobile ski manufacturing operation, and they host people who want to build skis and do ski class. And I am dying to go build a set of skis with this guy. I will do it before I die. If he's still in operation, I really would like to do it in the next few years, because, you know, people like that aren't around forever in terms of
Right.
their situations change and their thoughts and ideas change. But I just find that fascinating. But I'll have to send you a link to his website. I've emailed back and forth with him a few times and just haven't found the opportunity to go do that with him. But again, it's like taking that van life to the next level. He's
Yeah.
got his van and his workshop. I think that would be just the most awesome situation.
Yeah. So how long does it take to build a set of skis?
I think it's 4 days, if I'm not mistaken.
See,
So
that's a vacation. You should just take a vacation and go do that.
I should. You're right. And yeah, I work hard enough. I should treat myself to go do that. I just haven't found the hole in my schedule. The planets
Yeah.
haven't aligned yet, but I will
Right.
make them aligned. You know, there also on that list of people, I want to build guitars with a few different builders as well. You know, guys that offer workshops and things like that. Just go build a guitar and see how they would do it, because it's definitely going to be different than I would do it, and things like that. But I've got a few of those things on my list. I need to start checking them off.
Yeah. And if he's mobile, you can invite him out here to Colorado. We have some great skiing.
I have made that suggestion. I'm not sure he wants to make that trip. I think
Yeah.
he stays more around Tahoe and California, that whatever, that Bermuda Triangle
Down there.
there,
Yeah.
Mammoth and Tahoe, and there's one other one out there. Can't remember what it is. Big Bear. There we go. Big
Yeah.
Bear. Well, Brian, we've been on here for a little bit over an hour, kind of jabbering about what our projects are that we've got going in the shop. And this was really kind of a cool thing that we haven't ever sat and talked about the projects we've had going on before. So kind of a cool catch up. I hope everybody out there listening in the worldwide land got something out of it and found this entertaining. But for now, I am Greg Porter. You can find me on skyscraperguitars.com and Greg's Garage KC.com, along with Greg's Garage Instagram and YouTube, and Skyscraper Guitars Instagram and YouTube.
And I'm Brian Benham. You can find me at Benham Design just about everywhere on all of those social platforms. And you are listening to the Maker's Quest podcast. And if you need a clickable link to any of Greg's or my stuff, go to themakersquest.com and we'll have links to all our stuff there. Thanks for listening.